Hey everyone, welcome to the show. You ever get that feeling like, man, American progress is stuck, like we should be doing amazing things, but something's holding us back? That's
Yeah,
what we're diving into today
definitely.
with
Oh,
a really interesting nonfiction book. And make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're ready to get those brain juices flowing.
yeah.
The book is called Why Nothing Works. It's by Mark J. Dunkelman. You can find a link to it in the show notes below.
Yeah.
And it's not just a political rant or anything like that.
Right.
Dunkelman actually goes really deep into the history of progressivism
Yeah.
and argues that there's this kind of internal conflict at the heart of the movement
Mm-hmm.
that might actually explain our current predicament.
Yeah, and what's really cool is how he kind of frames this whole conflict.
Okay.
He identifies two distinct impulses within progressivism.
Okay.
He calls them the Hamiltonian and the Jeffersonian.
Okay, so two sides of progressivism. What are we
Exactly.
talking about here?
So on the one hand, you have the Hamiltonian approach.
Okay.
And this side favors strong, centralized authority,
Okay.
often led by experts to tackle these, big problems in society.
Mm-hmm.
Think of projects like the Tennessee Valley Authority,
Right.
massive scale, super ambitious, and in the end, transformative.
So using the power of government to make these bold moves,
Exactly.
even if it means kind of upsetting some people along the way.
Yeah, you could think of it like that.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, you have that Jeffersonian impulse.
Okay.
And this one is way more wary of that concentrated power,
Okay.
emphasizing things like checks and balances, individual rights,
Uh-huh.
and a more kind of diffused authority.
So if the Hamiltonians are all about kind of building that power up,
Yeah,
the Jeffersonians are more about breaking it down to prevent abuses.
exactly.
Okay, I see where the conflict might be coming in here.
Yeah.
It sounds like these two impulses could be pulling the opposite directions.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. So, and Dunkelman argues that's exactly what's been happening,
Oh, really?
especially over the past 50 years or so.
Wow.
He says progressivism has really leaned into that Jeffersonian impulse,
Uh-huh.
becoming increasingly wary of the establishment.
So a shift from like, let's trust the experts to get it done,
Right.
to hold on, who are these people? What are they really up to?
Exactly.
Interesting.
And he argues that this shift, while you can understand it in a lot of ways,
Sure.
has led to some unintended consequences.
Okay, I'm hooked. We've got to dive into those consequences.
Yeah, definitely.
But before we do that, when you started reading this book,
Uh-huh.
what were some of your initial thoughts?
Honestly, I was just struck by how Dunkelman takes a topic that could be so dry
Right.
and academic,
Yeah.
and he makes it feel so relevant to like how we live today.
Uh-huh.
It's this mix of historical analysis and political theory and real world examples,
Yeah.
And it's really stimulating, but it's also super engaging.
Wow.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's
Yeah, let's get into it.
okay, so let's get into some of the specifics here. You mentioned these unintended consequences
Yeah.
of this shift towards a more Jeffersonian approach to things. What are we talking about here?
Well, Dunkelman argues that in a lot of cases, the very things, the mechanisms that are designed to protect us from like abuses of power,
Uh-huh.
they've actually made it almost impossible to use that power for good.
So it's like we're so afraid of messing up or, someone getting too much power that we just end up stuck.
Yeah, exactly. And he gives some great examples. Take
Sure.
infrastructure, like trying to build a high-speed rail line in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's like running an obstacle course. You've got regulations, environmental reviews,
Uh-huh.
legal challenges, pushback from the community.
It's a wonder anything gets built at all.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not just these big projects. What about something like housing?
Oh, housing is a perfect example of what Dunkelman calls the manacles on the octopus.
The manacles on the octopus. Okay.
He talks about how zoning laws, which were originally meant to, promote orderly development,
Right.
have actually become tools for exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
They've driven up housing costs in so many cities
Wow.
and made it nearly impossible to build new affordable housing.
So the rules that were supposed to create better communities are actually making them less affordable.
Yeah, it's like good intentions, but gone wrong.
Yeah, totally. And this tension, does it extend to other areas?
Oh, absolutely. Energy, transportation, healthcare, it's everywhere you look.
Okay, so what does Dunkelman say we should do about it?
Well, he says that we've kind of created a system where both ends are against the middle.
What does that mean? Both ends against the middle.
So he's talking about how you have conservatives who want to like shrink the government,
Right.
and then you have progressives who are wary of its power,
Uh-huh.
and they actually kind of end up reinforcing each other,
Uh-huh.
and actually kind of end up reinforcing each other.
Huh?
And that leads to this paralyzed public sector.
So both sides are contributing to the very gridlock they complain about.
Exactly. It's this weird paradox.
So is there any way out of this? Does Dunkelman offer any solutions?
Well, he doesn't pretend to have all the answers,
Right.
but he does point to this need for balance.
Okay.
He's not saying we should just go back to like unchecked authority or anything,
Er.
but he thinks we need a more nuanced approach,
Uh-huh.
one that recognizes that you need both competence and accountability.
So finding that sweet spot between bold action and responsible oversight.
Exactly. And he uses some interesting historical examples to show this.
Okay, like what?
One that really stuck with me was his analysis of Robert Moses.
Oh yeah, Robert Moses, the master builder of New York City.
Right. He's such an interesting case study because he embodies that Hamiltonian impulse.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he got things done. He built parks, highways, bridges.
Reshaped the city?
Totally, but his methods were often really ruthless.
Oh yeah, he was very controversial.
Totally, and he was accused of, displacing communities, ignoring public input.
Yeah, prioritizing cars over people.
Exactly. So he represents both the potential and the danger of concentrated power.
Yeah, it seems like we learned a hard lesson from Moses, but then maybe overcorrected in the other direction.
That's one way to look at it, and Dunkelman argues that this overcorrection has had consequences.
Okay.
Like, think about the demolition of Penn Station.
Oh yeah, that beautiful
A
building.
grand architectural masterpiece lost to what a lot of people see as just short-sighted decision-making.
It's a reminder that sometimes a lack of vision can be just as damaging as too much vision.
Yeah, it really highlights the complexity of this whole issue. We can't just swing back and forth between extremes,
Right.
hoping to magically land on the perfect solution.
We need more nuance.
Exactly.
What were from other parts of the book that you found interesting?
His discussion of public authorities was really fascinating.
Oh, tell me about that.
So these are these quasi-governmental entities.
Uh-huh.
They were supposed to be more efficient and less prone to political meddling.
Okay.
But even these supposedly were political bodies ended up failing a lot of the time.
Really?
Yeah, often because of financial crises or accusations of being unaccountable.
Wow. So even trying to create a system outside of the system, that doesn't always work.
Yeah, it shows that there's no easy fix.
Right. It's not about finding the perfect system. It's about constantly adapting and learning from what we've done in the past.
Totally.
So we've talked about this tension between Hamiltonian and Jeffersonian impulses in things like infrastructure and housing. But I'm curious, how does this all play out when we think about, like, climate change, and the move to clean energy?
Yeah, that's where his analysis gets really interesting because in a way, the whole clean energy transition kind of embodies the exact dilemma that he's talking about.
Yeah, because we need both bold action and careful consideration of, what could happen.
Right, exactly. Dunkelman uses this example of like transmission infrastructure, or I guess the lack of it, to really make this point.
Okay.
We can have all this amazing renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal.
Right.
But if we can't get that energy from where it's made to where people need it,
Uh-huh.
it's basically
Yeah,
useless.
it's like having a super fancy electric car,
Uh-huh.
but nowhere to charge it.
Exactly. And Dunkelman points out that building new transmission lines in the U.S., it's just a nightmare.
Well,
It's this bureaucratic maze. You've got all these regulations, permitting processes,
Yeah.
not to mention pushback from all these different groups.
Right.
It can take years, even decades, to get a single project approved and built.
So again, we see these Jeffersonian checks and balances, meant to protect us,
Yeah.
but potentially holding us back from dealing with this, like, really big problem.
It's a total catch-22. We need to switch to cleaner energy sources fast, but the very systems we have in place to prevent abuse and make sure things are controlled locally, they make that transition so hard.
It's a little disheartening and makes you wonder if we can actually move fast enough to deal with something like climate change.
I get it. It's a valid concern, and Dunkelman doesn't try to downplay the challenges, but he does point to some possible ways forward, things he calls hybrid approaches that try to find a better balance.
Okay, can you give us some examples of what those look like?
Sure, one he talks about is the use of special purpose districts.
What are those?
These are basically super focused government entities.
Okay.
And they're created to tackle just one thing, like building and managing transmission infrastructure.
So it's like setting up a mini government
Yeah.
with one very specific job.
Exactly. And they have the authority to actually get it done, but they're still subject to oversight.
So you get the efficiency and focus of a Hamiltonian approach,
Right.
but with the safeguards and transparency that Jeffersonians would want.
Exactly. It's not a perfect system,
Right.
but it's a potential model for how we might approach these really complex problems.
I like that, thinking outside the box, and finding new ways to structure things. Does he have any other examples of this kind of hybrid approach?
Yeah, he also talks about the rise of public-private partnerships.
Okay.
So this is where government agencies team up with private companies to take on these big projects.
Uh-huh.
This can bring together all the expertise and resources of both sectors,
Right.
which could lead to faster and more innovative solutions.
So we're using the energy and kind of like creativity of the private sector,
Yeah,
but without giving up accountability.
exactly. But that's the big question, right?
Yeah, how do we make sure these partnerships actually help the public and don't just become ways for companies to make more money?
And Dunkelman stresses the need for careful planning, transparency, and strong oversight to avoid those conflicts of interest and make sure these partnerships truly benefit the public.
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. What are some of the key takeaways from Why Nothing Works that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest one is that this feeling of being stuck, that progress is just stalled. It's not just about politics or which party you belong to. It's actually rooted in this deeper tension, a fundamental debate about power and authority that's been part of America since the beginning.
And that tension, this back and forth between Hamiltonian and Jeffersonian impulses, is something we're going to have to figure out if we want to tackle the challenges we face, in the 21st century.
Totally. And while Dunkelman's book doesn't give us all the answers, it does give us a way to understand these forces at play and start a conversation about how to move forward in a way that's both effective and responsible.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Why Nothing Works. Big thanks to our expert for joining us and sharing your insights.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we'd love to hear what you thought about this episode. What part of the conversation really stood out to you? Do you see this Hamiltonian-Jeffersonian tension playing out in your own life or work? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the show for more deep dives into the topics that matter.
And if you're interested in learning more about this, be sure to check out the link to Dunkelman's book, Why Nothing Works, in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on this intellectual journey. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those deep dives going.